So besides being self-employed, having small businesses, buying and selling items on the side, rental property is one of the other pretty popular items we encounter when we prepare tax returns here. And so let's look at some of the things we encounter when we have rental property. All right, so as we talked about before, rental property, the income and expenses are reported on the Schedule E of your tax return. Income is the amounts paid to you to use the property, rent. Everybody knows what rent is. And expenses include the typical things needed to maintain the house in conditions suitable for renting. Insurance, interest, these are the big ones that we see quite a bit. And of course, depreciation, you can take depreciation off of it. The good thing about rental property income is it's not subject to self-employment taxes. And so that saves you 15.3%. So if you can actually get to where you're making a profit from your rental property, you don't have to worry about the self-employment taxes on your rental property. Vacation homes, a lot of people have a second home, not me, but some people who make more money than I do will have a vacation home. And so they might rent that home out when they're not using it. And so how we handle that is there's three things we have to look at. If it's primarily personal use, rented less than 14 days, the rental is ignored. And that's one of the most amazing things I find in the tax code is you can rent it for less than 14 days, make however much money you can in those 14 days or less, and it's ignored. It's treated as personal property all year long, and you don't have to, there's no deductions for anything unless you use them as an itemized deduction. So like property taxes, mortgage interest, those are itemized deductions that we talked about earlier, and that's the only deductions you would be allowed to. So it's treated just like a secondary residence. And now remember, the key thing is here, it's rented less than 14 days. Well, this is how the extreme home makeover people, you ever watch those shows where they come in and they take somebody's one-room shack and gut it and make it into a 27-bedroom mansion, and they're always fighting that deadline? That's this. They're trying to get it done within less than 14 days, because then what they do is they say the value that we gave you is your rent for these 14 days. Otherwise, these people would have to pay tax on it. If they rented it for 15 days, now the $500,000 worth of improvements they did on the property is now taxable to these people. So that's why they're always fighting, trying to get in before the deadline. They want to get it done before 14 days is up. Of course, these people who get on extreme home makeover, they have problems later on in life with property taxes. Usually the taxes in Denison, Texas, and Grayson County in general, and Texas in general, are very high. Property taxes are, on a $500,000 house, the taxes every year are about $12,000. So a person has to pay $1,000 a month to live in their own house. It doesn't matter whether the house is paid for or if you have a mortgage, you pay $1,000 a month to live in your own house. So the guy who had the one-room shack, and then these guys came in and gave him a nice, beautiful 5-bedroom, 4-bath, amazing house, his property taxes are going to skyrocket to the point where he may not be able to afford that house anymore. So primarily rental use, rented for more than 15 days and used personally less than 14 days or 10% of the days rented, whichever is the larger two numbers. So this is where now we're going to allocate between the rental and the personal, and the losses allowed subject to passive loss rules, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this is where you're renting it a lot more than you're using it personally. And so we just allocate things out between personal use, which would be non-deductible, and rental, which would then be taxable income and deductible expenses. So the key to remember here, it's rented for more than 15 days and used personally for less than 10% of the days rented, or 14 days, whichever is larger. And then our last one that we have is if you do both rental and personal use. You rent it for more than 15 days, you used it more than 14 days or 10% of the days, and again, you can now allocate out between the rental and the personal stuff, but the expenses cannot create a loss. And that's the difference between this scenario here and this scenario. Is here the loss is allowed, but over here you cannot create a loss. And rental properties very rarely make money. The way they make money is really you're having somebody else buy a house for you. They're paying you rent, which you use that rent to pay your mortgage, your property taxes, and your insurance. And so they're in effect buying your house. And then when you sell that house, hopefully for a large gain, that's how you kind of make your money. And so that's why this matters, is that these expenses can't create a loss. Over here, subject to the passive loss rules, which we talk about in a second, some of this loss might offset your W-2 income. Over here, nothing's going to offset your other income. You got to deduct things in a certain order until the income limit is reached. First off is interest and taxes. And again, now the IRS is saying you've got to use these here to offset this income before you could use them somewhere else as an itemized deduction. So since these items here are the two itemized deductions, they say use them up here first, and anything left over now you can use as an itemized deduction, which is in effect lowered your itemized deduction amount. And so now you might not have enough to itemize and got to use the lower standard deduction. So again, the IRS stacked the deck. Whichever way gives them more money is the right way. And that's why you have to use these first. Next is utilities and maintenance, and third is depreciation. Which again has another issue because depreciation is deducted from your basis. And the way the tax law reads, it says depreciation allowed or allowable. And so that can create a problem where you might have to subtract the depreciation from your basis, but you weren't able to use it up here. The one to remember here, you're renting it more than 15 days and you use it more than 10% of the days rented, or 14 days, whichever is larger. So these are the three scenarios to remember. These two are pretty straightforward and easy to figure out. This one takes a little bit more time. And then you've got to, limit your losses by deducting your expenses in these orders. So when you do have a loss that's you've incurred from your rental property, it's called a passive loss. And we're going to look at those in the next video.